So we just told her, you have cancer and you need to have surgery on Monday. And we hugged her and she pulled away a little bit. She said, will I be able to graduate on time? That wasn't quite what we thought she was going to be asking, but that's where she was at. Will I be able to graduate on time? If you wait for them to talk, you'll be able to see where they are at, what they need answered.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
For joining us for this first episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're discussing parenting through crisis, and our guest is Barbara Coloroso. Barbara, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Brian. And I look forward to talking about such a critical topic today, parenting through crisis in times of loss, grief, change, and COVID-19, which we're all experiencing regardless of the age of our children or the households we have, whether it's multi-generational or single parent home. It runs the gamut with all of us struggling in some way.
So I just want to add my piece. I appreciate your experience and knowledge that goes back over 45 years. It was relevant back then, and your core parenting beliefs and teaching continue to be just as impactful in 2021. So I think that's so important for parents who are just starting off, as well as grandparents that, have been on this journey for so long.
We're on 3 generations now.
Which is so neat.
Which is amazing to me. I get notes. My grandmother gave me the book when I had a baby, kind of thing. And I go, okay. And it makes sense because it's basic. It's time tested. It basically, our goal in parenting is to raise young people who can be responsible, resourceful, resilient, compassionate human beings who know how to think, not just what to think, who are willing to stand up for values and against injustices, who aren't easily led, who don't do to please, who have what Carl Sagan said all 3-year-olds have, the gift of skepticism and wonder, that why and wow. That little 3-year-old, wow, look at the puddle, wow, look at the mess, wow, look at the peanut butter, wow, wow, wow. And why? Well, I want our young people in the teen years to have that sense of wonder, that wow of life. They tend not to harm themselves and others when they do. And the why. When their friends say, let's go vandalize that building, I want your kids to say, why on earth would I do that? But it starts very, very young with something very, very simple. Red pajama, blue pajama. Letting kids make choices and decisions that are age appropriate and ability appropriate, and allowing them to experience the consequences for their own choices. Unless, of course, those consequences would be life-threatening, morally threatening, or unhealthy. I mean, you don't say to your 16-year-old, go ahead and jump off the building. We'll discuss the consequences after you land. No, you pull them back, give them a second chance at life. But the rest of the time, I like to give kids an opportunity to make those choices and decisions and mistakes and recognize they're held accountable for what they do. It will hold them in good stead in the rough times. If we're doing it in the good times, you say, well, we're in the middle of the rough times and I haven't done that yet. It's never too late. As long as you're both kicking and breathing, the kid and you, it's never too late. If you have teenagers who have not been given responsibilities and decision-making opportunities, you say, well, we got a little bit catching up to do. Not we did it wrong, or I heard it on this lecture, but we've got some catching up to do, because by the time you're leaving our home, you need to be able to make all of your own decisions and truly responsible for all of your own behavior. So let's look at what choices and decisions you can be making and know that you're still the adult here and there is a time to say no. But when we give our kids that opportunity, we also have to look at what I call the Tao of parenting. In the good times, it will hold us in good stead, but it'll really be an anchor in the rough times that we're going through today with COVID-19, which has thrown many a family into disarray and confusion and stress. I had the wonderful opportunity of taking care of our 12-year-old grandson, where his mom was working on the inauguration. So we had him, and I couldn't do the dishes and I couldn't do the laundry because he's in the middle of a Zoom class. And it really came home to, oh, that's what a lot of parents are going through. And can you imagine if you have 3 kids at 3 different ages trying to get their education that way? So there's a lot of stress. But what can help us out? I call it the Tao of parenting. It's an acronym. It doesn't give you an answer. It's like an algebraic formula. It gives you a path. Tao means path. There is not one path for any group of parents or different times in our lives, but it'll give us that backbone structure. TAO. They need our time, they need our affection, and they need our sense of optimism. Time. Parenting is not an efficient profession. It takes a lot of time. And I'm not talking that quality time you read about in the magazines where you say, kids, we're going to take a day and go to the zoo. And the kid says, I don't want to go to the zoo. You're going to the zoo and you're going to have a good time. And no, you cannot invite your friends. This is quality time with your family. That's not what I'm talking about at all. And then we give them grief. Do you realize how much money this has cost us? And they're like, and you're not having fun. They're not having fun. It's those moments during the day. Can you get off of your cell phone, away from the computer, when you ask your child, how's your day going? Because if he goes fine and he's got his head hung, but you only heard the fine, you've missed the message he's trying to give you. We speak 5 ways: our bodies, our face, our eyes, our tone of voice, and what we actually say. Only 20% of what that child is communicating to you is done with the words. The other 80% is what our body's doing when those words are being spoken. I use the example of the 3rd grade kid who had a teacher who didn't like 3rd grade boys, and he nailed her on it. He said, you don't like 3rd grade boys. The teacher looked down and said, that's not true. I like 3rd grade boys. The kid looked back up and said, would you tell your face that then? So what kind of message are we giving to our kids with our facial expressions and our body language? If we've got our backs turned to them and we're hidden in a computer, and they're really down and out, which they can be today, we've missed it totally. So we have to give our kids those moments in time. We need time to do recreation, relaxation, and rebellion. And you say, I'm not so sure about that last one. But no, we all need time to relax, to take a moment away, to be mindful. Many classes today will have a mindful exercise. As many of the parents listening know, I'm a former Franciscan nun, obviously former with a husband and 3 kids. But I learned to practice meditation on a regular basis. And I can't tell you how many times during my own kids' teen years where it would hold me in good stead just to take a moment away. And I remember my father, long before I went into the convent, when we had broken up with a boyfriend or we were struggling with a class and we were beating ourselves up, he said, sit down, shut up, and get to like yourself. Now, that's not a real elaborate meditation technique, but it was, come on, sit down, relax, and give yourself some time to relax. Recreation. Recreation is recreating ourselves. We need to not say, if you do this, all this work, then you can play. Play needs to be an integral part of your child's life. And now more than ever, we have to get outside and get fresh air, even if we're keeping ourselves distance, as so many of us are. But we all need that time to recreate ourselves, whether it's a board game or it's a puzzle or it's sitting playing a new game with our kids, to recreate and make sure we are taking care of our own health as well. And then rebel. You say, I'm not so sure about that one. But our children need to rebel against us at 2 against mom, 5 against mom and dad, and puberty against the entire older generation, of which you and I happen to be a member. But what they're saying is, I can be me apart from you. So if you start very young with red pajama, blue pajama, 3 outfits, pick one, here's your school clothes, here's your play clothes. By the time they're in the teen years, they will be making their own choices of clothes within limits and boundaries, but they'll be making them and they'll have their own personality. During this time, we've been able to put some of our old slides on digital now. And I have been sending some of them to my kids, and they're going, I don't want my daughter to see that. I don't want my son to see that. Talking about my grandkids, because they're in interesting clothes. interesting hairdos and those Doc Marten boots that the one kid had, you know? So it's that rebellion, letting them be themselves in their own way. I say if it's not life-threatening, morally threatening, or unhealthy, let it go. And I can't tell you how many parents have said, it got me through the teen years over that hairdo my kid wanted to wear. And, you know, it's not life-threatening, morally threatening, unhealthy. It will grow back. So that's that kind of attitude that we have to have in that rebellion. So giving them time to relax, recreate, and rebel for all of us. And we can rebel against all this isolation too by saying, you know what, we're going to get in the car and drive, or we're going to go for a walk in the park that we haven't discovered yet to get ourselves away. But wear a mask, you know, and keep your social distance. Staying healthy during that rebellion time because it's life-threatening and unhealthy not to do that or getting others ill. So we have to look at that. So they need our time. They need our affection in the good times, but especially now, a smile, a hug, and humor. For many of us, it's that virtual hug we're still doing with our grandchildren. All three of my grandchildren have now had a COVID birthday. And the first two had it in April. The two of them had birthdays in April. And they said, I hope Nick doesn't have one. And sure shooting February 1, he had a COVID birthday, a drive-by. And I remember with my middle grandchild, I've always baked their cakes. I love baking cakes and elaborate ones for them. But I was also teaching them how to do it themselves. And both the 11 and 12-year-olds made their own this year. And the 11-year-old got very creative and made a mask cake, but it was a gas mask, and had a good time with it. But the hardest thing for me, and I broke down in tears, was driving by to say hello to him. All of us are having those experiences, and those are hard times, but they're moments of connection. And so we need to give them that smile, a hug, a lot of humor. And you say, what's there to be humorous about? There's some gallows humor out there about COVID-19 and about things we're doing today, you know, and if you can get yourself, there was one with two ducks and the young duck was saying, I don't get this math. And the dad duck was saying, I don't either, because you have a shitty teacher right now. And it's the duck because they're home, you know, doing virtual learning. So we have to be able to laugh. Humor can get us in so many ways over the rough times and through them. On a more serious note, a young boy, 12 years old, parents had died in that plane crash that landed in the Everglades. No bodies were ever recovered. And a year later, he was asked by reporters, how are you doing? And he said, well, every time I think about my parents, I think that those alligators had first-class food when they got my parents. And people were just kind of like, oh, that was his humor. He also liked the shock on people's faces, saying, I can make an impact here. He grieved, he cried, but he also had humor. So don't be surprised if your kids don't use some gallows humor during this time, and you can feel free, and there's plenty on the web to look up some humor. We need that smile, a hug, and humor in so many different ways. Now, again, it's hard to smile when you're masked, and that's where the virtual, just like we're doing here, to see one another's faces is so critical, and to connect. And you will find that for me, it's my grandchildren, but for many of you, it's your children doing funny things on their Zoom, adding characters over the heads of one another. Yes. And hey, and laugh with them. You know, you're dealing with a serious time, but we have to have some laughter. So they need our time, they need our affection, and most importantly, they need our sense of optimism. And it's very easy for young teens and preteens to fall into a trap right now where they think it's all going away. You and I have the perspective of distance where we know that dance that they're missing, they'll get through it. But they don't know that right now. Right now, that's the most important. I can't go to a dance. I don't get to get dressed up. I'm missing my prom. I'm missing my graduation. Those are real. So you cannot just take your perspective. You have to walk in their shoes a moment and go back and think about those times and say, you know what, we're going to get through this. But it's not that rose-colored optimism where all's right with the world, because you know what, it's not. We have families, perhaps some who are listening, who have relatives who have died during COVID, gotten very ill during this time, died from other things, not COVID. And because those are passages of life. And so we have to be aware that in these rough times, we can be optimistic. But Viktor Frankl, a death camp survivor, said it so beautifully. He wasn't talking about rose-colored optimism. He's called it tragic optimism, that when you have been brought to your knees in grief, can you get up in the morning, fix your children breakfast and say, we're going to get through this. And notice I didn't say, you're going to get through this. We are going to get through this. Bishop Desmond Tutu said it so beautifully. We're interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. We need one another, and how much we have all been woken up to that in this time of COVID-19, that need to be connected with one another. And that's saying we're going to get through this. But how you have dealt with adversity in the good times will give your kids a clue as to how optimistic this household is in the rough times. I got stuck on my way to from Winnipeg to the Pas, Manitoba in a snowstorm. The Pas is in the middle of nowhere, which if you're an optimist, it's halfway to everywhere. And the plane cannot get in. You should have seen some of those people carry on. It won't be here for 8 hours. Some ranted and raved that whole 8 hours. Some hit the bar for 8 hours, and some read a good book for 8 hours. All three groups got on that same plane 8 hours later. Some were still angry, ready to throttle the pilot, which would have made us later. Some, after 8 hours in a bar, weren't sure and didn't care if they were on a plane. And some had read a good book. Now, I ask you, when's the last time anybody gave you 8 hours of uninterrupted time to read the book you wanted to read? You see, it's our point of view. We can also look at this time optimistically and say that we as a family will have dinner time together because mom's not coming home late or dad's not coming home late from work. Intergenerational families have had to pull together as they've always have, but even stronger. And we begin to wake up to the realization of how important one another of us are on making this family work, to be a unit going through a major crisis together. And so being optimistic, hopefully we were optimistic before, but again, it's that tragic optimism. And there's an old Sufi saying, and many people will know the last phrase, this too will pass. And we often use that in the rough times, but the full quote is, remember, in the good times and the rough times, this too will pass. That we've got to celebrate those moments of good and laughter and fun, knowing that it will pass, that we all will go through rough times. And we need to know that we can be there for one another during those times. So that Tao of family is critical during this time of COVID-19, with all the other losses and griefs that we're experiencing.
So with that and COVID, there's loss there. What about loss in family with relationships? I know a lot of people who have struggled, especially right now, with their marriages, and there's been separation and divorce. So what would you say to a parent who the marriage has ended or the relationship has ended, and now they have their children to explain that to?
Yes. Well, let's go. I'm going to take a step back and cover the big one first.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the biggest, the most permanent. And the passages of grief that we go through and how to tell our children, because then it can go into any of those other losses, including divorce, which for some children may not be as grave a loss as we anticipated if the marriage was very rocky to begin with and there was instability. So there's lots of reasons people get a divorce. And we can't be so judgmental as to what's going on in that family. But within the family, we have to recognize that there will always be the passages of grief. So let's start with the big one, death.
Okay.
And that is the most final. So how do you tell a child about a death. It's the same formula, although it's very simple, but it's not easy. Same formula that you do when you're telling your child there's going to be a divorce, or you're telling a child, as we've had to do with our middle daughter, that she had cancer. And those things are tough. So how do we do that? You give the headlines first. And by the way, don't use euphemisms. Grandma bought the farm. Grandma bit the dust. Expired, so we don't want to use those. But what we do want to give is the headline. Grandpa died. Not we lost grandpa. A 5-year-old is going to say, well, go find him then. Stop crying. Go find him. No, grandpa died. And you talk to kids about the attributes of death. And so you give the headline first, then you give the facts. Then you be present to your children for whatever they need. So you say that grandpa died. And for so many of us today, it's grandpa died of COVID. Or grandpa watch the berries, very, 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 very sick. You want to put a lot of berries in there, because if you happen to get sick then,
Right.
you'll be scared. And you don't want them to be frightened. The biggest fear is that if grandpa can die, if dad can die, if my sibling can die, then it can happen to any of us. And so there's an old Jewish happy song, a happy story. A man died, then his son died, then his son died. And people say, that's a happy story? Yes, they died in order. Grandpa died before dad, before son. The biggest hole you can put in anyone's heart is to have your child die. And so we need to recognize that kind of grieving that goes on then. It's different. But the headline is, your grandpa died, and then you give the facts of COVID. He was very, 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 very sick. His organs didn't work. And so you give some basic facts. And then be quiet. That's the hardest part, because he's in a better place. How do you know that? They're going to wonder, how do you know? And our faith can get us through a lot. But during this initial shock, we need to be there for our kids to say, grandpa died. This is how he died. And then be quiet. And there was a family in Nova Scotia who had their son, who was off to college, come home on a weekend, and he missed the curve and he died. They had to tell his three siblings in the morning that their brother had died. Now, they give the headlines and then the facts. The 15-year-old brother was angry, which we can expect during the teen years. Anger at death, anger at the virus, anger at whatever. He was angry at the ambulance driver. He was angry at the curve in the road. He was angry that mom asked his brother to come home. His brother was speeding. He was angry. The 10-year-old said, how fast was he going and how did he die? And you look back and go, whoa, 7 to 10-year-olds want the facts, man. Just give me the facts. And that's one way they process it. The 5-year-old put his arm around his mom and said, don't worry, Mom, when he's done being dead, he'll be back. Because for a 5-year-old, death is not permanent. And hopefully all of us have taught our kids about death before we're burying grandpa or a child or a parent. The goldfish is really dead. He's not just doing a back float. Nope, really dead. So giving them an introduction to death beforehand is helpful. Leo Buscaglia has an amazing book called Freddie the Leaf on death, that we can talk about the seasons and how that leaf dies and how it becomes mulch and fertile soil for the next generation. And so let's say it's a divorce. The headlines. You don't say, well, kids, we have something we want to share with you. It's very difficult to do. And in their minds, they're thinking one of them's dying. No, they're getting a divorce. Or that something horrible is happening to the family. This is hard on them, but give them that up front. What on earth can we say to any of our children that will buffer that? Nothing. The reality is grandpa's dead. The reality is we're getting a divorce. The reality is to a child that you have cancer. And then you give the facts. For our daughter who had cancer, it's that you're going to have surgery on Monday. And we found out, well, she was at a dance. They were supposed to let us know on Monday. They called on Friday to say it was a rare cancer and she needed to have surgery on Monday. And both of us were just shocked about, oh my gosh, how are we going to tell her? When she walked in the door, we didn't say, how was your dance? Because our eyes were red anyway. And so we just told her, you have cancer and you need to have surgery on Monday. And we hugged her and she pulled away a little bit. She said, will I be able to graduate on time? That wasn't quite what we thought she was going to be asking, but that's where she was at. Will I be able to graduate on time? And so uh, if you wait for them to talk, you'll be able to see where they are at, what they need answered. And don't dismiss it. Well, I don't know. If you don't know, say, I don't know, but let's find out. We'll be sure that you want to be on that video conference with the doctor. And you're old enough to be able to talk with them about this, giving them the opportunity to feel like they matter at this moment. When I was in the convent, I had a novice directress who talked about many years before her brother dying very quickly of a virus that was going around. And her mother was devastated. And the two older girls, but not much older than the brother, rallied around their mom, but then mom took to bed. And one day the oldest walked in and said, Mom, he's dead, but we're still alive and we need you. So we have to be tuned in. And if you're at a place where you are not functioning, get help. It's okay. It's healthy to get help, to reach out. And that's where you and I, as neighbors and friends and family, need to be there for one another. You know, they ordered pizza every Friday. That was their mother or father's tradition, order that pizza for them. So it shows up and it says to young people, normal still happens, even in the midst of all this chaos. The story about the woman who dropped her two little boys off to school and came home, and there was a moving van in front of her house, and her husband hands her papers, divorce papers, and said the lawyer said I could take half of the stuff. And so she called the counselor. She was devastated. And the counselor said, I don't know how to tell my kids. She said, I'll meet you at the coffee shop about a block from school. So she met her at the coffee shop and she said, but how am I going to tell them? And she gave that very basic formula. Give them the headlines first, give them the facts, and avoid all the emotional stuff. Well, he ran off with that young secretary. No, save that for your friends, not for your kids. Somebody you care deeply about that will listen and hopefully be supportive of you, but just listen. And so headlines, facts, and then be present to them. So she gets to school in the afternoon, her eyes are red, and the oldest boy could tell something was wrong. The other boy had had a good day at school. And so she put her arms around both and she said, your dad and I are getting a divorce. And he took his things today. Headlines, facts. There's nothing to soften that. The older boy put his arm around his mom and said, Mom, we'll get through this. He was the one to be supportive, but the youngest pushed her away and said, no, no, no. He has my soccer uniform in his car. Who'd have thought? Some will say, who gets the dog? And you're thinking, I'm not even thinking about the dog right now. It's what do they need? And along with virtual learning today, some kids are going back to school, some are not. And ask your child how they feel about going back to school. Many want to go back. I think of my oldest granddaughter, who's just turning 13, and she's ready. She wants that social life that was so important to her. The middle grandson said, no, I'm doing better on online learning because he's accelerating in some topics, but also he'd been targeted by a boy who's no longer there, which is a relief to him going back. But there may be some kids who have thrived during this time. Mm-hmm. Their siblings may not have, but they have because they don't have to worry about the lunchroom, the hallways, the meanness on the bus. And so the bullying is that's another whole lecture we could get into, but the whole bullying aspect. When I asked my older daughter about her young son, the one who just turned 10 and had his COVID birthday, and she said, I think he wants to go back to school. And he said, nope, I'm happy. And so she said, the line that I recommend we give to parents is talk to me about it. Just say to your kid, talk to me about it. Tell me about it. And he said, I'm not distracted. Whereas one was concerned that kid has moved on. It's been a troublesome person and I'm really thriving here. And the other saying, I'm not distracted. So what can we do to make sure that we hear what they're saying? So headlines, facts, be present to your child. On any of the decisions, the small ones and the big ones, be present to them. Maybe you're going to have to say, you're going back to school. So mommy or daddy or grandma can get back to work. And you're going back to school. That's the headline. The facts are you'll start Tuesday. Talk to me about it. Tell me about it and listen to them. They may be afraid. They may be excited, but you have to talk to them again about precautions and stuff that the school's taking and you're taking to get through this. We are going to get through it. You never get over it. One of my grandchildren said, Grandma, this is going to be a big thread in the tapestry of our lives. Because we always talk about a thread, that this person in your life is a thread. That thread doesn't go away. It's still, but this is a big thread that has impacted all of us. So let's look at the passages of grief. No matter what the issue is, there are normal passages we go through. Kubler-Ross, amazing woman, did a phenomenal job with helping people who had terminal cancer get through their own stages of grief. The problem is we've taken that to everything and said, these are the stages. And you, as if you concrete steps, you move along and, oh, wait a minute, you can't go back. Yeah, you can't. I look at the 3 passages of grief as a circular thing. The first is the very pain of the oh no of it all. That's the intense pain, the shock of the oh no. In fact, that's often what we say when we hear that somebody has died or somebody is severely ill. Oh no. This is that oh no moment. That lasts about 7 days. And we as a Western culture do not go back to our histories and our ancestors, whether it's a faith tradition or a cultural tradition, to look at how long it takes to get through that first passage. Most of us live in a culture where, unless it's an immediate relative, and many of us have friends who are closer to us than even our distant relatives are. It has to be immediate relative, you get 3 days. Well, 3 days doesn't even begin to deal with the shock of the oh no of it all. It's about 7 days. If you weren't in shock, you could not buy a coffin for your kid. I mean, that is such an irrational thing to be doing that you have to be in shock to be able to do it. So those first 7 days, it's a grieving time. And so I don't know what to say to that person. Well, again, I go back to different traditions. And in the Jewish tradition, you sit Shiva and you sit it for 7 days. And when you walk in to meet somebody who's sitting Shiva with their bit of torn clothing, renting the fabric of their lives there with that tapestry, they don't say a word until they speak, because you don't know what to say. Do they want to talk about the death, how long it took, or how sad they are? Do they want to talk about the good times from that person's life? You wouldn't know that if you hadn't been present to them and you hug them and then be quiet. Nothing else has to come out of your mouth until they speak. Maybe they want to sit in silence and just be present. That's okay. And then you won't be fumbling or saying the wrong thing, or he's in a better place and they're going to rip you a strip there. No, he's not. And I miss him. No, you be present to what they need. And so it's so critical during that first passage of grief, and know that it's the piercing grief of the oh no. That's the same with identifying an illness, the same with a family that is changing its structure in lots of different ways. And you say, well, but I'm getting married to this man that I love. And yes, they have 3 kids and we have 3, and it's going to be a wonderful family. Well, it may be a piercing grief of the oh no of it all for some of your kids. So recognize that even in your joy, and you want them to share in your happiness, they're not there yet. So we have to recognize that and talk to me about it. Here's the headlines, here's the facts. Talk to me about it and find out where they're coming from. So the second passage is the intense sorrow. You've gotten over the shock, but now you're in intense sorrow. And that can be 6 months to 2 years. The Navajos have a saying that if it's been a catastrophic loss, which COVID has been on the Navajo Nation, or in so many other communities today with that massive loss, or it's been a loss totally unexpected, a suicide and the like, that count on 2 times 4 seasons. And we saw that in my own town of Littleton at the shootings at Columbine, where 2 young boys killed their teacher and 12 students and then killed themselves. And that whole sense of sorrow was there, the intense sorrow. The oh no had passed. Now we're into that graduation, that birthday, that anniversary is all colored with this sorrow, steel gray, cold sorrow. And so it can last from 6 months to 2 years. And when the school started back up in the fall, they had a new freshman class ready to start their freshman year at high school. And they had a few moments of silence and recognizing those who had died. And then they had this raucous celebration for those kids. Now, some people were really upset about this raucous celebration, but what they weren't recognizing is that we're all in different passages during that time. Those who had children shot or the teacher shot, we're still going through all those anniversaries. And for some, it did take the 2 years, but we need to give them that grace, that 2-year time. Others were ready to get back. In fact, one young boy said shortly after the shooting, when are we going to write our final exams? And people were a bit taken back about that. I mean, we've got dead people and you're talking about exams. Why? They need normal. Don't be surprised after grandpa's funeral. The teenager says, I want to go to the school dance. You're going, what? You just buried your grandpa and you're still grieving. It's they need a little taste of normal in their lives. So that's so important. So you have the piercing grief of the oh no, the intense sorrow. And the third passage, and notice I didn't say final passage, but the third passage is the sadness that is tempered with the joy of getting on with your own life. How do you know you're in that passage? Doesn't feel bad to feel good. You don't feel guilty about having a good time. And the Irish, and being Black Irish myself, it's a custom you don't put the headstone up for a year. And the reason for that is you will have gone through all the private anniversaries, all the holidays and the like since the death. And then you put that tombstone down and then you can go on with your life. Doesn't mean, now remember I said that's not the final passage, because an anniversary, a song, another child can bring you right back into the first passage, the second passage. And so these aren't things you get over. They're things you get through and know that you can go back. A young boy who had been in remission in his teen years from leukemia came out of remission and was very ill again. But his father had talked to him about those passages, and he was truly at that third passage where there was a sadness that he had had cancer, but there was also this joy of life. And he said to his dad, do you think I'll ever get to this third passage again? And that you can say yes. You can say yes, yes. But you're going to be drugged into that when you have those horrific losses in our lives. So remember, it's a simple formula, but it's not an easy one. And all of us will go on a different journey, hopefully with people alongside of us. But those who have experienced the death of a child or a severe illness of a child will know that our partners don't always go through the passages at the same time, or they're right in the middle of the same passage and we can't support one another. That's where extended family and community comes in, where we need to be helpful to one another.
I like that. So I'm going back to your phrase, talk to me about that. Do you have any other phrases, questions that we could use when checking in with our kids in regards to death of a loved one or just loss of, their life situation?
I have a section in my book. And by the way, if you go to our website, kidsareworthit.com, there are handouts for parenting through crisis and raising ethical human beings. And my original one, Kids Are Worth It, Parenting with Wit and Wisdom, that you can please feel free to use and download and use in your own classes or for relatives you think might be needing it. Talk to me about it can hold you in lots of situations, not even of loss and grief. Your child comes home with an A+. How you deal with that We'll give your kids a clue if they can come home and tell you they wrecked the family car. You see, our children need to be able to talk to us about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so your child comes home with an A+, you say, I'm so proud of you, you take after my side of the family. We're going to put that up on the refrigerator for the other side to look at. They'll probably not take advanced trig. They'll take a lesser course because they don't want to disappoint you. And so you don't do that. And your child comes home with an A+. All I've said to my kids when they came home with their report cards at all is talk to me about it. Tell me about it. And one might go, look, I got all the words right, even spelled February right, and the R's in a funny place. You get excited about your child's excitement. But how many kids today who are praise dependent, reward dependent can't get excited unless you give them permission? Do you like this? Is this okay? How'd I do? Ugh. No, I want them to be able to affirm that I like this. And you never knew it was a dinosaur until your child said that was a dinosaur. Oh, well, talk to me about that dinosaur. Is that one that's just been discovered, or did I miss that? Humor again. So talk to me about it. Tell me about it. Can occur in all these different kinds of situations with your child. But with the A+, the one says, I got an A, and he's so excited because spelling's been difficult. The other one, spelling's been easy. I say, talk to me about it. He says, well, spelling's easy. I'm not getting excited. I'm not posting it on the refrigerator. I say, wow, you have a phenomenal gift. We have to find a way for you to use that gift. And maybe you've been working in the soup kitchen, and you can say you're old enough to come. Or you're at a senior center helping out, or online. How can you help kids who are struggling right now? Can you tutor a child? Your sixth grader can help a second grader in the neighborhood on Zoom for reading and giving them an opportunity to serve. James Natchway, the phenomenal war photographer, said, do good because good is good to do. Spurn threats of hell and bribes of heaven, you do because it's the right thing to do. You want to get out of a funk, go do something good for somebody else. It's one of the best ways. You've been targeted. I often have people say, but my kid was targeted. I say, yeah, but what's he doing for himself and what's he doing for someone else? Let's find something that you can use. So with the kid who's done well, I don't get all excited about it. I just say, what are you going to do with that gift? And get them ideas on how to handle that gift. Because they are more likely then to do the 3 antidotes to the 3 most virulent agents ripping apart the fabric of our humanity today. Hating other human beings with utter contempt, hoarding me, mine, and more instead of us, ours, and enough, and harming through lying and cheating and stealing. What's wrong with lying and cheating and stealing? First of all, it destroys your own personal integrity. Second, it destroys your relationship with the other human being, and that destroys community. Martin Buber said, I am I and you are thou. And we have a common humanity. In bullying, I'm I, you're an it. It's that dehumanization of another human being, that utter contempt where I put you outside my circle of caring. I tell kids, you don't have to like every kid in this classroom, but you must honor their humanity. Treat them with dignity and regard. You don't have to like them, but you have to care deeply about them. So hating, hoarding, everything is, we're gathering up. No, now's the time to share. There are a lot of people in desperate need. And to let your children see that they can help and they can give up that old Lego set to someone who will have absolute joy for getting it, giving them the opportunity to do that. And lying and cheating and stealing just destroys community. So what are the antidotes to that? You can work on these from the time they're very, very young. Help them to care deeply, share generously, help willing. Anything you can do in their lives that they can care more deeply about themselves and others. Teaching them manners, not etiquette. Manners are that backbone. How do you relate to other human beings to make them feel welcome? And now in this time of COVID, we have wonderful opportunities. We have to extend ourselves more to truly care. Can you find that extra jacket? Do you really need to? Can you fold those neatly? Because we're going to bring them someplace. I took my middle grandson to a homeless outreach program because he had outgrown a bicycle, and we all had jackets that we did not need in our closet. So I talked to him about how important it is that these are other human beings we're giving it to. So you don't just throw them in a bag, and you don't throw dirty things in, you don't throw torn things in. You put in things that if they needed mending, we mended, and fold them up neatly and bring them to the outreach program. And one was one of his backpacks. And he said, yeah, I don't really need two. I don't even need one right now, Grandma. I said, we probably ought to keep one. But and it wasn't within moments. Someone had walked up to the man who was coming to get the things out of the car saying, "Can I get that backpack? I need a backpack." And the man said, "Sure, meet me at the front door because I have to check it in first." And it was like, whoa, somebody wants my old backpack. We have to teach kids to care deeply about one another, share generously, and help willingly. Now's the time we can say to our kids, we've got things that we hadn't planned on. Now we have to have our masks all clean. We have to all help out with the laundry, all help out with the cooking. Your children can learn to cook during this year, COVID-19, in a way that they couldn't before. They can pull up a recipe, make a mess in the kitchen, and you just celebrate that mess. But the more we can help kids care deeply, share generously, and help willingly during this time, we'll help them through those passages of grief. We'll help them in the rough times, but also serve them well when they are again, in that Sufi saying, in the good times. What are you worried about? Your child's mental health, or your spouse's mental health, or your grandma's mental health? There are three things you look for: the intensity, frequency, and duration. It's okay to cry. And we've got some magnified grief where someone may have had a spouse die, not from COVID, but during this time of COVID, where they couldn't have. I went to my first Zoom funeral for my own sister, and sitting out in the parking lot, it's like, well, okay, this is different. I had the wonderful opportunity to be with her before she died. So the funeral, I could watch the hawk that was above the church and do a Zoom funeral. But it's there that we want to look at and I cry. I think of something, I'm looking at photos of my sister, I cry. That's okay. But it's an intensity where you're sobbing to where you're uncontrollable, and the frequency of it, regularly doing it, and the duration of it. So if it's intense, it's frequent, and the duration is long, get help. Now we can do. Michael Phelps, the phenomenal Olympic swimmer, realized he needed help. And now he talks in commercials about getting online help because he was dependent on that help to help him get through a really rough time in his life and to deal with the issues that he had faced as a child with big ears and phenomenal dolphin body that helped him win all those gold. But kids mocked him. So to get through all that, and he is a strong advocate and a great person to do it for online help now that you can seek for your children, for yourself, for a relative, for a friend, to reach out because we can't always do it alone. We can't always get through this by ourselves. This is a once in a century event that we're going through. Acknowledge that, honor that, and we can say this too will pass. But it's good to think about the good times that have passed as well. That's that third passage that we'll all have to get through during this time of COVID-19. But with community, we can do it.
Agreed. So can we touch a little bit? I love your critical messages.
Oh, 6 critical life messages.
Yeah.
As an educator, I didn't care where a kid came from. Dad's an alcoholic. Mother has an interesting occupation. Brother's been in jail. Every kid walking through those doors needed these messages. But we also need to give it to our own children every day. I believe in you. I trust in you. I know you can handle this. You're listened to, you're cared for, you're very important to me. We have to say that in lots of different ways. I remember when my daughter was diagnosed with cancer, I said to her cancer doctor, I wish it were me. And he looked me in the eye. He said, why? Don't you trust your daughter to deal with her own life events? And it was like, oh my. Yeah, I can be here to support her, but I can't take her life experience and make it mine. I have to be there for her. We will get through this together. Whatever the end result is, we will get through this. And she has our middle grandson, so you can tell how she's gotten through this. Yes, life journeys, they're fascinating. And things hit you very quickly. And now this is a long term. And we've got to recognize that it's been a strain on all of us. But rest, recreation, rebellion helps. The Tao of parenting will help: time, affection, sense of optimism, and those 6 critical life messages. Teaching kids to care deeply, share generously, and help willingly. If that's all you do during this time, you will have done a lot for your kids.
Agreed.
Excellent stuff. Now, I'm really curious now because, this timeless advice that you've been sharing over 3 generations. What was it that led to you just really getting into this work? What led to you just becoming a parenting expert and sharing this information with people around the world?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I'm not an expert. I'm an educator. I'm still learning. Now I have grandkids. It's another learning opportunity. It's a fascinating journey. I started at 15 working with kids with special needs. I was a lifeguard, and I had a friend who had a sister who had Down syndrome, and she couldn't go into the regular swimming classes. So we opened it up, not thinking, to having a class for children with handicaps. Well, we had kids who were deaf, physically handicapped, the whole gamut. And I got a lot of help from my friends who were good swimmers to help me teach them one-on-one. And from there, when I entered the convent, I entered a convent that worked with kids with special needs. Our order, Sisters of St. Francis in Milwaukee, had the Coletta School, which is where the Kennedy woman was, and the John F. Kennedy School in Illinois. So I did a lot of work before I even had my teaching degree in a residential setting with kids with special needs. And right across the street was the School for the Deaf. And so I got that exposure and loved it. And then I realized that convent really wasn't. A year of silence was great. I'm glad for it. My first 3 years were wonderful, and glad I went, glad I left. And no, I didn't meet my husband there. So, but during that time, we marched in the civil rights movement and the like. And so we were activist order that I would never experienced in the small town that I grew up in. So it widened my horizon tremendously. I came back to Colorado to finish up my degree in special education and sociology under a great master who I had studied in university, and he had moved from Illinois to here, Dr. Oliver P. Coso. And then from there, I went on to teach kids with special needs. And then I went back to the university and taught at the demonstration school with seriously troubled adolescents. And they were a great gift to me to hone my own parenting skills before I had my own children. And I have told my kids that you're going to have to work real hard after having kids with serious issues in their life. You're going to have to work hard to shock me. All three tried in the teen years, but it was a great experience. And from there, I went on to lecture to school districts, and it was in Hamilton, Ontario. They had a professional development day 40 some odd years ago. And the administration said, some of the parents are not happy with our PD days because they have to arrange for childcare and all of this. Would you be willing to do a parent session with the parents in the evening? And that's where I started, in Hamilton, Ontario, to do parenting lectures. And then I was raising my own kids and learning a lot, but I had learned from 15 years old on up, and working in a residential school with kids with special needs and kids who were hard of hearing or deaf. And then kids who, in order to get in our program, had seriously hurt somebody or killed somebody, where they were on their way back from being adjudicated. It gave me some real gifts. And I also have to say that there were great people, Adler, who I studied, the Adlerian philosophy. And I'm often asked, are you a behaviorist or a humanist? Because that was the big break during that time. And I would have to say I'm a humanist. I'm not a real fan of bribes and threats and rewards and punishments, because I think they interfere with ethical behavior. And so that laid the foundation. I can go back and look at the very basic structure of my work and would not have to change that. The only thing I've had to add in my work, all of my books, is online issues. The online world and the offline world have now merged for our young people. It's not the online world and the real world, it's the online and offline have merged to create a different world. And so that wasn't even an issue when my first book came out. And my bully book, it's the only book I've had to revise 3 times in a 10-year period. Why? Online issues. Cyber issues, and not just cyberbullying, but cyber issues. In my book, Just Because It's Not Wrong Doesn't Make It Right, I have a whole section on on just the basics. And again, it's a basic structure on limits and boundaries for your kids online and offline, whether it's for good things or for ill. We need to be constantly increasing responsibilities, decreasing limits and boundaries, and holding kids accountable. That's real today as it was 50 years ago.
I would say even more so with COVID right now, because us being home with our 4 kids, especially in the winter, it's cold here. What do they want to do? They want to be on their electronics. They want to be playing games, right? I mean, they do spend a fair amount of time outside, but yes, it's putting those boundaries, limiting their time and following through, because it is very easy for parents to say, oh, it's okay. Go do your thing. Go on the tablet. Leave me alone, right?
That's why being aware is so critical. Being
Mhm.
aware what there's on it, or teach me, asking your preteen or teenager to teach you how to make those silly things on Zoom.
Yeah.
Do over your head while you're Zooming with them. Talk to me, tell me how to do it. Making sure you have provided access. I just got a beautiful note from one of my grandkids. I had sent something from the BBC about some dinosaurs, and he's been a dinosaur fan since he was 3. And he thanked me for sending him information to help him learn more. It was just, wow, really, that would, and I told his mom, she said, I didn't know he sent it, which made it even more heartening, to come out of the blue. That he appreciated what I was sending. So we have to engage with our kids on those same tools.
Mhm.
And that's a good time to say, talk to me about it, because I don't understand this at all. And they do. They picked up Zoom just like that.
Oh,
They
yes.
can
Oh,
show
yeah.
you all the tools that are in Zoom. Oh, grandma, you want to put some slides up here? Here's how you do it. Okay, show me. Yes. And what we have to realize is that we are parents till they reach puberty. Then we're their mentors, their models, and their guides, not their friends. They don't need us as a friend. You want a friend, go find a friend. They need you as a guide. They don't need you. And then in adulthood, you can become their good friend, which you'll be grateful for because they pick out your nursing home.
Oh, I love that.
And this is great stuff. Like you said, it's really timeless information that any parent can really use, and there's a lot of life lessons that you can use outside of parenting as well within the framework of what you teach. So this is great stuff.
Thank you. It's been a real joy, and I wish you the best with your podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.